From Sugar23, I'm Angela Ledgerwood, and this is Lit Up. This week we decided to do a special end-of-year episode to share some of our favorite books of 2022 and to put some guaranteed good reads on your radar for the cozy holiday season. I decided to speak with one of the most well-read people in my life, who happens to be a colleague at work. Her name is Ruby Smith. She's an editorial assistant at the Sugar23 Books imprint. And as well as helping me pick guests for this show, she helps me assess what kind of books we should publish with our partners at Penguin Random House. So she has the eyes and ears of the publishing world. She used to be a bookseller, and she's one of those people that has these meticulous lists in her phone of every type of book list you should read, and she's going to share them with us on Instagram. It was such a pleasure to also speak to a colleague and get to know her on a different level, even though we're close and we're, around each other every day. So ask someone you love what their favorite read of 2022 was and the book they give most. We're going to share ours. I hope you love this episode. This week we're trying something a little new, and I have one of the most prolific readers in my life on the podcast, Ruby Smith. Welcome to Lit Up.
Thank you for having me.
So Ruby and I work together at the Sugar23 book imprint, and she also helps on Lit Up and has the most incredible suggestions of who to get on the show, what writers we should be watching, and all the new talent out there. So who better to have on Lit Up than Ruby?
Thank you.
And Ruby, just tell us a little bit about your background. Why are you so drawn to books?
Well, I've always been a reader since I was a kid, and that never changed and went away, and I studied English in school, so I was always reading through college, and that was my focus. And then the day I graduated, I got a job at 3 Lives bookstore in the West Village, and I worked there for 3 years. And that was like the best job, and I just spent all day recommending books to people and talking about books, and then I got to read a lot of new authors and things that were coming out in advance. So I think that's like the basis of my love of reading in my adult life, and kind of has shaped how I see my reading life. I got so much joy out of recommending books to other people and then hearing feedback, what they liked, and getting to know people's taste and developing relationships through that was such a fun way to connect with people, my friends, but also customers and people I just wouldn't know otherwise.
It also forces you to expand what you read.
Totally.
And I'm sure someone, a 90-year-old man might come in looking for something that you've never heard of, and then it's that domino effect. And is it true that you wrote either your thesis or another huge kind of body of work about
Infinite Jest?
Yes.
I'm
like, that huge book.
I actually wrote it about 3 huge books, which was Ulysses, Infinite Jest, and Finnegan's Wake. Which makes me sound very pretentious.
I have read none of them, people, so don't feel bad. But maybe we need the crib notes from you.
Yeah, and people sometimes will ask me, like, oh, should I read them? And, like, of course, I would say you should, but it's really, like, I specifically wrote my thesis and did that in an academic setting because you have so many resources and other people who have read those books. And I read them in the context of classes where people are explaining them to you, and you have context. And I know many people have sat down and read those books on their own, but for me, it would have been like a far less enriching experience.
Which was your favorite out of the 3?
Probably Ulysses, even though I do love Infinite Jest as well, just because it's such a kind of experience and there's such a kind of cult following around it. But I took this amazing class with a professor named Gregory Erickson, and we all read Ulysses together, and then we traveled to Dublin and did kind of like a tour of James Joyce's Dublin. So that was such an immersive and fun experience that I just have really fond memories of that book.
Gosh, what a way to experience an author.
Yeah.
I know there are all these amazing tours, Jane Austen tours and things, which I would love to do.
Yes.
And so much tourism now around, certain fandoms. But that one seems great.
Yeah, it was so fun.
Okay, so now everyone knows exactly why Ruby's here and how lucky I am to work with her. So I have asked her to kind of think back on 2022 and what books really kind of stood out, having reflected on the year. And then maybe for those of us who are looking for some guaranteed good times that have been vetted by Ruby to kind of bring them back. And then we can go from there. What's the first one on your list for this year?
So the first one on my list is a book called The English Understandable, and it's by Helen DeWitt. And it's part of the New Direction storybook series. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're these really pretty little hardcover books, and they kind of have like a foil shiny cover. And the premise of the series is that they're books that you can read in one sitting. So it's a short novella. It's only about 70 pages. And it was one of my favorite reading experiences of the year, just because I did finish it in one sitting. And because it's so short, I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but it centers around the 17-year-old girl who grew up in Marrakesh in a very wealthy environment with very wealthy parents. And you kind of are situated in that world, and then this story starts to unfold, and it just becomes a total page turner and is very surprising. There's like a big twist. So I don't want to say more than that because it is so short, and so much of the fun of it is kind of, uncovering the story. I think it would be a great gift just because it's such a pretty book. And I just think, anyone will have a good hour when they sit down and read it.
Oh, okay. The next one.
Okay, the next one is a bit longer. It's called The Midcoast by Adam White. And I didn't know anything about this book when I picked it up, but I just thought the cover was striking, which is maybe a theme of the books. And it's this pretty, photograph of a house in Maine. The book is about this town in the mid-coast of Maine. It's about two families. It's kind of a family drama. It starts out with this crime and then kind of goes back in time, and you slowly kind of start to uncover what led these two families to participate in this small town drama. It's just very atmospheric and kind of ominous and propulsive, but also like very heartfelt. And the writer Adam grew up in the mid-coast of Maine, so you can tell he's really familiar with that setting. And I think this would also be a good book for maybe the men in your lives. I think men can be a harder demographic to shop for. That was a big request I would get at Three Lives. It's like, I need something for my dad or my brother, and anyone would enjoy it. But I think if a man in your life is looking for a novel, it's a good one.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
You always come with authors that I've never heard of before. My read of this year is going to seem so
What's
commercial.
Yours? I'm curious.
Well, it's not the read of the year. I think it's for me, the guaranteed good time.
Mm-hmm.
Like Lessons in Chemistry was the book.
Yes.
I feel like you could give anyone and they would really enjoy it. And it's a great book for a discussion, a book club. It's a great gift for your mum, or probably wouldn't say narrowly for women, but it is about a scientist called Elizabeth Zott who is very frustrated and gets discovered, in one of her frustrating outbursts, to be on TV, to host a cooking show that's very much based in the sciences, and it goes from there. But it's clever and funny, and the Times did a huge feature on it, and it deserved it all. Mm-hmm. Such a smart writer. The author's Bonnie Garmus, and it's her first novel, and she was a science editor for many, many years.
Oh, cool.
And a textbook editor. So you just know that the equations and all the things in it are real. And Elizabeth Zott, the character, gets into rowing on an
I didn't
on a
know.
rowing machine.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because I rowed.
Yeah, you have to read it.
Yes, no, it's on my list.
And apparently Bonnie herself can't stop rowing either.
Oh, really?
She is a rower, so you'll love it. But I want to keep going back to yours.
Okay, my next one is a memoir called Acne by Laura Chinn, who's an actress and a comedy writer, and she created the show Florida Girls. And it's her memoir kind of about her growing up in her childhood. She had this wild childhood. She was raised in Clearwater, Florida and LA, and, came from kind of poverty. And she's was a mixed race girl growing up who was kind of white passing. And so she talks about, her parents kind of struggled with poverty and addiction. And she went, swaths of time living on her own at a very young age. And she started drinking when she was 11. And all of this sounds like very dark, and it is, but the book is very, very funny and just such a clear portrait of her childhood. That's one of those things that's, stranger than fiction. Like, you can't make it up. And I just loved her voice. Such a great example, I think, of a funny memoir about this really serious topic. And I think we see a lot of those kind of funny memoirs from celebrities, and I don't always actually find them, to be funny or touching. And this one really is all of those things. I didn't know anything about her before reading the book. Someone recommended it to me. And then a few of my friends read it after me and just really enjoyed it. And I'm curious to see what else she writes or, other shows that she does now. It stuck with me. I thought about it after I finished it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love the sound of that. Well, you just mentioned the word portrait, and I'm going to bring up a book that I want to read that I might get for the holiday period. And it's Maggie O'Farrell's The Marriage Portrait.
Mm-hmm. I've heard it's great.
It just, that cover, and everyone, I'm sure you've seen it. It's a portrait of, is it Lucretia? No, I just want to get her name right. Well, firstly, it's about the life of one of the Medici women. And it's her portrait on the cover, and it kind of has been ripped away. And we see her portrait throughout. And that just looks filled with drama, but also drawn from history in a really, smart and clever way.
So I've only read her memoir, which is amazing. And other colleagues of mine at Three Lives just love her and adore these novels, and I have not read them yet. That's also on my list to read.
It's interesting this year, looking back, it didn't seem like there was that one book that everyone had to read. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of big authors with books out, but a lot of them maybe didn't get that momentum, or there wasn't that giving, that whisper network of you have to read this with some of those big ones. I wanted to read the new Jennifer Egan, but I haven't yet. Like books like that, I feel like Franzen had another one.
There were almost too many because there were so many this fall of big writers coming out. And, when one comes out, it's kind of like, okay, this is the one everyone's going to read. But there were so many this year that I feel like you had to kind of pick and choose.
Well, and then what I love about publishing is that, the hardcover comes out, but really most of us come to books 2 or 3 years after they've been published, when the paperback's out and we've seen it around, however 20 times, and then we finally reach for it. I often like to see what rises to the top, like after a couple of years, what's still on the Three Lives favorites table. That is such a great way to find good books. Ruby, another one where you can move on to books you want to read.
One that I actually have read, but it's not coming out until April, is Curtis Sittenfeld's new novel called Romantic Comedy, which I just read an advance copy of, and it's so great. And I'm just Curtis Sittenfeld's biggest fan. For those of you who don't know, she wrote Prep, An American Wife, and many other great books. And I feel like Prep was the book that was in every girl's bedroom when I was growing up. And for some reason, I never read it until like just a couple of years ago. Roxane Gay just reviewed her new novel, and she was saying how it's so satisfying, and all of her novels are really satisfying. And that's not always the case with books or novels. It takes place at kind of a fictionalized version of SNL. And it's this female comedy writer who has noticed that, much like in real life, many of her kind of dorky or dweeby male colleagues end up dating these, beautiful movie stars who come on to host this late night show. But that never happens for women writers who work at the show. And then, of course, a very handsome pop star comes to host the show, and they kind of hit it off. And, it goes from there. And she's wondering, like, oh, is this rule that she's kind of observed, like, is that really true? Or can she date this really handsome pop star and, overcome that work. Stereotype? And it's just super fun and fast and really well written and really well observed.
That sounds like the perfect opening to a book.
Totally.
Like, sign me up. I cannot wait. It's kind of romantic comedy-esque, but knowing that Curtis Sittenfeld has written it and, obviously elevated it. It feels a little, find sometimes Meg Wolitzer has the same, like that intelligence.
Totally. She's such a smart writer, and she's one of those writers where she describes things to that, I couldn't put words to, like a feeling or a situation that I've thought about, but she just has the perfect kind of encapsulation of that.
Well, now I want to talk about some guaranteed books that people can find comfort in. I mean, whatever that means, reading comfort that you have vetted for us.
So my number one pick in this category is a book called Heating and Cooling by Beth Fennelly, who's the poet laureate of Mississippi. And this is a book we sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of copies of at Three Lives. And it was it's definitely an underrated book. It's the subtitle is 52 Micro-Memoirs. And it's a very, short, slim little read, and it makes a great gift. It has a really great cover. But it's Beth Ann's, her micro-memoir. So a few of them are a few sentences, a few are a few pages, just about, little moments in her life. Some are really funny and some are really tragic. But it's truly the book that I would give to anyone and know that anyone would have a good experience with. And I have given it to so many people. It's probably my most gifted book. It's the book I've bought the most to give to other people.
Well, the book I have given the most and seems quite timeless is this book. And I've had the author Ingrid Fetell on Lit Up many, many years ago. And I keep having friends come back to either that conversation or that book, and it's called Joyful, and it's a nonfiction book. And I've planned to give it to people again already. It's kind of on my list to go and buy. And it's about the aesthetics of joy, so the objects, the colors, but really investigating the why our subconscious finds certain places, things appealing, calming, or joyful, particularly that will make you smile and give you energy. It's a lot about what kind of energizes you in the real world. But then, obviously we can't all get rid of all our furniture and only have a swing in the living room. Right. But, we can do certain elements of that. But it's really great if you have anyone in your life who's a designer or, loves color. May sound like, oh, I think I know what that's about. But the examples in it are so strange and beautiful. And she goes to many places around the world to kind of understand different types of aesthetics. In Japan, there's this apartment these two artists have created to completely like discombobulate you your sense of balance. So the floors are slanted. There's almost like humps and bubbly bits on the walls and on the floor. So if you wanted to brush your teeth, you actually have to hold on to a handle so you don't slide. And apparently people go there and it kind of strengthens their, it challenges your kind of perception of the world. It sounds kind of scary and weird, but apparently it's really an amazing experience.
Well, and it's like that study about color theory that I don't remember the name of, but I feel like has really permeated that, certain colors have certain effects on our mood. And there's like a specific shade of pink that they paint locker rooms, or hospitals are painted that specific color to calm people down. And I think the locker room ones is to like kind of amp you up before a game or something like that. And the findings were kind of so strong and so ubiquitous that it was, I think, pretty widely adapted in certain public spaces.
Yeah, and also if you think about the sharpness and angles of objects, it talks a lot about architecture and that what is seen as important work for so long has been these sharp, kind of brutalist buildings and things that are actually not pleasant to either look at or live in or even be around, but they seem to give this the austerity of it lends a kind of this idea of like intelligence or kind of like a higher purpose, but actually people have to interact with these places. It's really, really interesting. And the best example in there is like saying, have you ever seen a Bond villain, surrounded by puffy cushions and like frilly florals? Like, no. You start to see it everywhere and you start to notice why you feel really relaxed in some environments and others. I could talk on and on about it forever. What's another book that you would give someone or that is that easy?
Another
gift?
one that I thought would be a great gift that came out this year was Fly Girl by Anne Hood. And Anne Hood's a great writer and essayist. I think she has the record for the most New York Times modern love columns.
Oh, how much has happened to her?
A lot has happened to her. But before she became a novelist and an essayist, she was a flight attendant. And she graduated college and knew she wanted to be a writer, but also knew she had to get a job. And she grew up in Rhode Island and knew she wanted to see the world. And so she applied to all of these different airlines to become a flight attendant. And she was accepted at TWA, which no longer exists. I think it was 1978. So it was kind of right at the end of what she calls, the golden age of air travel. And it's her memoir of kind of all the behind the scenes of becoming a flight attendant and the training she had to go through and the customers she had to deal with. And, back then it was much more about hospitality, and she had to learn how to make all these drinks and prepare meals. And it's a really fun, kind of, adventurous story and really warm. And I think another one that just anyone would have a good experience with.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah.
I had so many of my mum's friends were air hostesses, which I think you could call them that then. And
I know. I think now is it flight attendant?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's not gendered in the same way. But that was the same impulse. Like, I grew up in a country town. I want to see the world. And it was such a glamorous job for a while there. And I think very exciting.
Yeah. And she talks about, I think a lot of these benefits have changed, but, the programs in which you could put yourself on a list and hopefully if there was an extra seat, you could fly free anywhere in the world. And, of course, she was also flying to all these places for her jobs. And, you develop friendships and you have different people and places in different cities. And you also have specific routes that maybe you're a regular on. So it was a really interesting look, like behind the scenes of, this world. I mean, flight attendants, of course, still exist, but the world of flying has changed so much since 1978.
Yeah, I feel that maybe we're spoiled that as flyers, we don't appreciate how incredible it is to be able to fly.
Yes, it's become so mundane.
Yes.
But back then it was really an experience for people and a privilege, and it was treated that way. Like you would, of course, dress up to go on a flight, and you were always served a hot meal, and you had a cocktail, and you would chat with the people on the plane.
Okay, I'm going to share one last gift type book. And he'll be on Lit Up. And it's a book all about natural wine. And it's called The World of Natural Wine by Aaron Askoff. And this is a guy that didn't grow up drinking wine or really knowing anything about it, was living in LA and needed a job. And he, got a job like many of us had in a restaurant and seemed to have a knack for selling wine. He trained as a sommelier and then felt very disillusioned with kind of the wine he was selling and decided to go to France and find out more about how this wine was being made and go and meet the winemakers, particularly in Beaujolais, which is a region of France that has birthed the natural wine movement. It's such a great book. There are lots of photos in there. You meet these characters. It's really the story of kind of organic farming and biodynamic farming as well, but told through the lens of these kind of renegades all in this one region and how that spread. But a great gift for someone who likes wine or someone who just wants to have a bit more knowledge, because I love wine and know a little bit about it more from being a waitress for a long time in a former life, but I still find it really intimidating, and certain restaurants and places will make you feel intimidated, which is such a shame because wine is just about like a history of a place.
I feel like there's been so many behind the scenes about restaurants or kitchens, but not as much about wine or sommeliers or, vineyards, the people who are involved in the winemaking process. I think it's still very opaque to a lot of people.
So what's another one?
Well, speaking of, food and wine, the last two I'll recommend are both food books and kind of, I'd say, the classics of the food book genre, which is Blood, Bones, and Butter by Gabrielle Hamilton, which is probably my favorite kind of food memoir. And she's the owner of Prune. And I actually listened to the audiobook, which is great, and I definitely recommend. And it's just such a fun adventure through her life and also through food and wine and the restaurant world. And I actually just finished today Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, which I had never read, even though, it's such a classic. And he has such a great voice, and it's a very different take on the restaurant industry, much more kind of like masculine and aggressive, but it was really fun. I listened to them both on audio.
Well, I also have to hark back to Stanley Tucci, who we had on the pod, and you can listen to that one. But his book was so fun, but definitely the second season of Searching for Italy is the most beautiful, escapist, but also a look at artisans and people so passionate about what they make. That was so inspiring. I think everyone will agree that Ruby needs to come back. She has
Anytime.
All these lists of what to read for when and why. So we'll get you sharing them far more often.
For sure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Lit Up is a podcast from Sugar23. It's hosted by me, Angela Ledgerwood, and produced by Liam Billingham. Olivia Allmeyer is the marketing and editorial consultant. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Andrei Radovsky wrote the theme music. See you in 2023.